What's up, fight fans? Ryan Thomas here, live on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. UFC 258 post-fight reaction show. These are always one of my favorite segments, one of my favorite shows to do each and every major UFC main event. I love to give what I call my post-fight reaction, my post-fight recap. What is next for the winners and the losers of UFC 258 or any major UFC pay-per-view event? This past Saturday, UFC 258 went down. Kamaru Usman, Gilbert Burns for the UFC welterweight title. Usman, the reigning, defending, undisputed champion, going into the bout. Gilbert Burns, a undefeated MMA fighter at the welterweight weight class at 170 pounds. Never lost at 170 until this past Saturday night. Kamaru Usman retains his title. Kamaru Usman and still UFC welterweight champion. And I waited a few days to hop on here to recap UFC 258. You guys can feel free to fire your comments away in the comments section below, whether you're tuning in on Facebook or YouTube. I really appreciate the support. I want to remind you guys that the Thomas Take Sports Podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. That is where you will be listening to this episode on the audio side of things. Please feel free to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Those reviews do matter. They do add up. If you could leave a positive one, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much for tuning into the show, interacting with me on the show. Whether you're tuning in on Facebook or YouTube, I greatly appreciate it. So, all that being said, back to the subject matter. UFC 258, Usman retains his title. And what an impressive performance it was from Kamaru Usman. I want to start off right out of the gate here. On the pre-fight show, the preview and prediction show that I put out prior to UFC 258, I did fully believe that Kamaru Usman would retain the title, and it would be in pretty impressive fashion. I love Gilbert Burns. I love Gilbert Burns, what he's been able to do at welterweight. I just didn't feel like he was quite ready. But Gilbert Burns actually proved me wrong. Despite being on the losing end of things, Gilbert Burns was ready. Gilbert Burns had Kamaru Usman hurt in that first round and just simply wasn't able to land those successive blows, consecutive blows, to finish Usman there in the first round. Usman survives. Then he goes into round 2, round 3, and really started to establish that jab, a nasty jab. But what I noticed from Kamaru Usman was that he was switching his stances, which allowed Usman to really fire, rights, lefts with relative ease, because Gilbert Burns was just flat out confused within Usman switching his stance. So I found that to be very fascinating as well in terms of what the matchup brought, how the matchup materialized, being that both Usman and Burns know each other fairly well. They were former training partners. Did that really play a factor in the fight? I think it did, in terms of how did it impact these guys negatively? How did it impact Burns negatively? How did it impact Usman negatively? I feel like it impacted both of them in their own way. Usman knew that he had to go in there and retain his title. No ifs, ands, or buts. Gilbert Burns was trying to take that said title from Usman, and really, the fight played itself out as was a welterweight right now. And once the fight was over, you could really see that Kamaru Usman was devastated for his friend, the fact that he had to do that to Gilbert Burns, and the fact that, Gilbert Burns came up short in his first and only title shot, knowing that he's got to, somewhat start all over again, go back to the end of the line and, go from there. But I want to start off with the hot take of this episode as well. Moving on from, my reaction to the fight itself. Kamaru Usman, a wonderful performance from him. One of the better welterweight champions in recent memory, but there was something that kind of circulated. News, comments, tweets, posts, whatever you want to call them, that circulated. And it created the hot take of this show, of UFC 258 show, brought to you by the Thomas Take Sports Podcast and Ryan Thomas himself. that the hot take of this show is that recency bias is killing the history. Time you have a new champion, whether it's Israel Adesanya, Usman, they do something spectacular. They do something special. Shortly thereafter, you have casuals out of the woodwork saying, wow, Israel Adesanya, he might be better than Anderson Silva. Oh, wow, Kamaru Usman, he might be better than George St. Pierre. The answers to those statements are hell no and hell no. Know your role, know your place, understand Israel Adesanya's got a long way to go to match what Anderson Silva did as the UFC middleweight king. And in his own right, Kamaru has a long way to go. Granted, Usman tied the consecutive wins record that was created by George St. Pierre, that was set by George St. Pierre. But tying a wins record is one thing, and matching the title defenses, the amount of title that Pierre accrued UFC welterweight reign is another thing altogether. Usman's defended the title 3 times. Great start. St. Pierre defended the welterweight title 9 times. So let's really put things in perspective here. Mike Bond, MMA, big-time MMA journalist of MMA Junkie, he tweeted it best. He said it best. Really, let's put this in perspective. I greatly appreciate what Kamaru Usman is doing right now. I greatly appreciate what Israel Adesanya is doing right now, but neither one of those gentlemen have done nearly enough to be considered in the same breath as Anderson Silva and George St. Pierre. I don't know if anybody ever will achieve that type of greatness in terms of the amount of title defenses. I don't know. You know, the records are made to be broken. But furthermore, what those guys contributed to the sport at that time, we're in a different world now. The UFC's on ESPN Plus. It's on ESPN. It's everywhere. Back then, just pay-per-view. Wasn't really the case. Barely on Spike TV. So put things in perspective here, folks. I understand that Usman is a great fighter. He's a great champion, and I'm very impressed with his title defenses. And I want to give him credit where credit is due. This fight against Gilbert Burns, it might have been the best he's ever looked after a bad first round. The fight with Jorge Masvidal, not really the most entertaining fight. Not really the most entertaining bout, but he had a lot to lose in that bout due to the fact that Masvidal was taking that fight on short notice. The Colby Covington fight, the fight between Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington, is one of the best fights I've ever seen. Dana White has said it's one of the best fights he has ever seen. So, Kamaru Usman has had a great little run here, and obviously his performance in winning the championship, winning the welterweight title, was one of the most dominant performances ever against Tyron Woodley. 10-8 rounds across the board for Usman. So, I'm not going to say that Usman, is a scrub or that Usman hasn't, had a great career. He's had a phenomenal career. But to mention him in the same breath as George St. Pierre, or to mention Israel Adesanya in the same breath as Anderson Silva, it is so misplaced. It's such a jump of the gun in terms of what those guys contributed to the sport in comparison to what Izzy and Usman potentially. Could they be on that level? Of course, but I think a lot needs to happen in order for that to take place. The next question is, who deserves the next title shot against Kamaru Usman? Now, Usman let it be known that he wants to take on Jorge Masvidal again. He let it be known that that's the fight that he wants for himself and for his future and his fight career. I think that's a fight that Usman should want due to the fact that it makes him dollars. If it makes dollars, it makes sense. S-E-N-S-E, sense. Makes sense, C-E-N-T-S as well. So for Usman, I get why he wants to fight Jorge Masvidal, but in terms of what the fight fans really want, do the fight fans really want to see a rematch between Usman and Masvidal? I just don't feel like that first fight tickled my fancy nearly enough in how I thought it would. Foot stomps from Usman, pressing Masvidal against the cage. I don't see how that fight really ends in better fashion or more entertaining fashion than the first one. Usman is going to implement the same game plan against Masvidal that he did the first time. If you fight someone and you win, why would you change your strategy the second time around if you beat them the first time around? It's a very tough sell, and it's a sell that I'm not buying it. To me, a fight that makes sense in terms of who deserves the title shot next, Colby Covington, for all the bluster and the brash arrogance that Covington exhibits inside the octagon and outside the octagon. Inside the octagon, his skills speak for themselves. He is a talented fighter. He is a guy that I believe if Usman wasn't in the division, we would be talking about the welterweight champion being Colby Covington. If Usman wasn't around, if he wasn't even in the UFC, Covington would be held in that regard. And the strengths and weaknesses of both Usman and Covington cancel themselves out, which create this quote-unquote firefight between Usman and Covington like we saw in the first fight, which made that fight one of the more entertaining bouts in UFC welterweight history. That's one of the fights that I would like to see once again. It's a tough matchup for Covington. It's a tough matchup for Usman. I don't know if Usman is fully threatened by the skill set of Jorge Masvidal. I feel like Masvidal is a great matchup for Usman. I feel like Usman is a bad matchup for Masvidal. And furthermore, if we have to ask ourselves who is next for the title shot between Masvidal and Usman, I would then say to myself, well, if we have to ask which one, they should fight. Masvidal and Covington should fight. Winner then takes on Kamaru Usman for the UFC welterweight title. But Masvidal doesn't want no part of that. He doesn't want no part of that. He doesn't want to fight Covington due to the fact they're training partners back in the day, and goes back to Usman and Burns. One of those guys knows which one is better. And there's a reason why Masvidal is not entertaining a fight with Colby Chaos Covington. And I'm not saying that Masvidal is ducking Covington, but I am saying that he's being smart as a businessman within his career. What would you rather have, a title shot rematch, or a opportunity to take on a training partner that does not bring out the best in you? So, I think that Masvidal and Covington should have been the fight to make. It should have already happened. The fact that it, as far as it being signed, the fact that it hasn't is extremely frustrating for everybody involved, fight fans, the UFC, and Kamaru Usman is on the receiving end of this call out, from Masvidal that is such it just doesn't really do it for me. Like I thought the original fight was going to. And I think that, fight fans have every reason to feel a little bit, frustrated with what is next for Kamaru Usman. Ultimately, I feel like what is next for Kamaru Usman is a rematch with Jorge Masvidal, but I'm not exactly excited about it. The question is, what is next for Gilbert Burns? Who could Gilbert Burns fight? I believe that Burns has to really take a step back, look at some of the title fighters, some of the challengers in the UFC welterweight division, who is ranked inside the top 5. Really, anyone virtually inside the top 5 would be an opponent that Burns should be interested in. You're looking to get back into that title conversation. You're looking to get back into the win column with a massive win. What bigger win for Gilbert Burns than taking on a top 5 opponent, whoever that is? I think that could be potentially next. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is out there. I'd like to see, Wonderboy get a shot at a top contender. Gilbert Burns was a top contender. So that would make sense as well. So sound off in the comment section below. I will be posting this on MMA Facebook groups as well. It'll be on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast YouTube page. So thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the fights. We got a big fight Saturday night. Derek Lewis versus Curtis Blades. That's a heavyweight slobber knocker potentially, depending on how that one goes. I'm going to analyze that matchup in the next episode of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. Feel free to subscribe on YouTube, like the Thomas Take Sports Podcast on Facebook, and thank you for the support. Stay safe and enjoy your day.